Now, without further ado, let's meet our keynote panelists who are going to be exploring the thorny issue of musculoskeletal disorders, the kinetic chain, and what we can do to reduce both cost and suffering. Please welcome John Doney, Senior Director for Thought Leadership at the National Safety Council, Dr. Paul Reed, best-selling author and founder of the Bridge Chiropractic Clinic, and Ron Havard, Chief of EHS for the US Army. Good morning, gentlemen. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Morning.
Hey, great to have you with us, guys. Listen, much appreciated. Super to have you all here, and we're going to be diving into this topic. First of all, I hope everybody is safe and well. I know that these are somewhat unusual times, prolonged unusual times. I'm not sure if there is a kind of a verb for that, but yeah, we seem to be living through a period of sustained uncertainty. But we are here today to talk a little bit about MSDs and the kind of the challenges they present. And this session is called the $50 billion problem you need to do something about. I guess that tells us something about the scale of the challenge here. So maybe let's start with the basics. Why are MSDs such a big challenge for the industry? What are the numbers telling us? John, I'll perhaps come to you first with that one, if I can. If you wouldn't mind leading things out, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to do that. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. So the National Safety Council has been tracking injury facts for, nearly a century now, and your number tracks with ours. We placed the 2019 cost of injuries and deaths at about $171 billion impact to the economy, and that's in terms of what we can readily account for. We have, ergonomic and MSD sort of strains and sprains is the number one issue by volume, about 31% of injuries in 2019. So those numbers roughly match up, about $50 billion of at least readily identifiable impact. And I think, when we were chatting a little bit about this pre-session, the way I look at why the scale of this issue is so big is not because we don't know what to do about it. It's because it's constantly a little bit too far down the chain for us to get to in an average year when we're dealing with some very serious injuries and incidents that we're trying to track down the issues behind. If we have folks who are injuring life and limb, or there's chemical exposure or there's fire potential, we're probably going to go after those first. And when we get down to MSDs and ergonomic type issues, they tend to just be a little bit beyond our grasp any given year unless we're really concretely focusing on them. So that's been the case now for a long time, and I think certainly as we've moved into this year of uncertainty, that's continued. So that's really the scope of the issue. It's not that we don't know that it exists necessarily. It's just that it's always just slightly beyond our grasp when it comes to priorities for most organizations.
Yeah, really interesting, John. Ron, let's perhaps come to you. Do you agree that this is a challenge of prioritization as much as anything else? I think most people are probably aware that the problem exists and that we need to do something about it. But is it the case that it's just slightly higher up the chain there?
I agree with John completely. You've got it's a chronic issue instead of an acute issue like you're talking about. It's the low-hanging fruit versus the high-hanging fruit. It's a 10-year process, a 12-year process before you might see an injury or not. It just depends on the individual. And then you start getting into a lot of companies want a one life cycle return on investment. And for each different company, that could be like 6 months, 12 months, whatever that life cycle time frame is. In the Army, they have like a 5-year life cycle is what we kind of expect on any projects that we do. So it's just kind of different across industries and across companies. So since it's a chronic long-term issue, you just don't have the attention in it because they tend to think that's the individual's, an individual being wimpy, an individual complaining, oh, I need an ergonomic chair because of my back. And people want to chastise that individual more so because they see it as a weakness instead of it being a true work type situation. So it goes back to education, proper evaluation, assessments and so forth, and putting in the programs to combat that early on.
So there's a challenge around stigma that perhaps needs to be overcome in order to elevate the conversation.
Yes. Yeah, we're seeing that places where I've worked at in the past, like Foster Farms and Hewlett-Packard, we put in incentive programs based on performance for the individual that was also tied into ergonomic processes within the actual workplace. And we saw more buy-in from everybody across the board, from leadership to individuals, than what you see not by not doing those processes and empowering the employee and getting them involved in stuff. So you kind of see the full spectrum right there.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Ron. Paul, let's maybe come to you next and get some thoughts from you. Obviously, I guess you see this day in, day out. You have a chiropractic clinic. You must see the impact of these MSDs on a daily basis.
Yeah, and, it's exactly what Ron said. It's from chronic reoccurring malfunction and dysfunction. And so unfortunately, a lot of our employees are showing up to work with that dysfunction, and it's an employer's responsibility to give them as big as leg up as possible when it comes to regards to preventing injuries. And it is the long-standing injuries over time that complicate things the most.
Paul, it may be too early to tell, given that it's only been 12 months, and this is often down to repetitive long-term injuries and repeated strain. But are you seeing any impact off the back of COVID-19? Obviously, there's been a huge shift in the ways of working. We're seeing people working from home in different environments, perhaps, than they were previously. Are you seeing this having an impact?
100%. Everybody's trying to adapt to a new environment. And then the folks that are at work, their workloads have increased, like we talked with John the other day. And so that increased workload with compromised performance and functional alignment is leading to overstrain and overuse and fatigue prematurely, which is decreasing production and increasing their likelihood of injury. And so we really need to address where they're at, standing, sitting, and help improve those environments for those folks. So long-term, everybody, unfortunately, today is short-term focused. We have things at our fingertips super fast, and they're not forward-thinking, which is, that way with health period, we need to be forward-thinking. So the more we can long-term think of the impacts of what we're doing today and how it affects us tomorrow, and make changes immediately, the better outcomes we'll have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess the question then is, how do we improve awareness of the challenge and maybe look to move the issue up the priority chain? How are we addressing that issue? Ron, how are you tackling that over at the U.S. Army?
Well, locally, we're doing a lot more empowerment with the employees. We're doing a lot of JHAs and a lot of position description alignment to ensure that their jobs that they're performing is, one, within their description, and two, that we've assessed all the hazards and try to reduce as much of the ergonomics as we can, and then just empowering the employee and getting them involved. That communication, we've by doing so over the last, let's say, year and a half or so, we've increased our safety culture overall in my area from a 4.1 to an 8.4 on a 10 scale. So by getting them involved and getting them active and empowering them to do their job and to be more involved in the corrective actions and getting them educated and stuff, it's increased our safety culture, it's decreased injuries, and it's been great across the board.
And is that about acknowledging that the problem exists and that that it's okay to kind of bring these issues to attention?
Yeah, we destigmatized it in such a way that it's a true work condition instead of it being an individual weakness type perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. John, how are you seeing organisations, I guess, raise awareness of the challenge? What's working well in your view?
Yeah, I would agree with Ron in that, this is partially a cultural issue. I think it dovetails well, and there's some leverage here with organizations' attention during COVID-19 in particular on things like mental health, fatigue, stress, well-being. We have an opportunity to dovetail, ergo and MSD alongside that. These are all things that traditionally, in most of the workforces that it most greatly affects, it's just been culturally hard to bring to the fore. You work in transportation or warehousing and logistics, and you're expected to just be on your game, and you're churning all day, right? So I think that cultural component's a big part of it. Another piece of it is simply just giving the workforce a voice in this. Very often the types of issues we're looking to solve with this are ones that the workers know how to solve. If you're someone who's bending every 15 seconds to pick up a part because you just simply don't have a cart there that's at height with your body to pick up the part that you need, you probably know that would be an easy fix. So figuring out the right mechanism in your organization to have a direct line from the worker who has the issue to the person who's going to be authorized to solve the problem and make the spend That in some organizations, even that is lacking. And then having a broader understanding at an organizational level of, there's a business case for these. Yes, every individual expense may feel like it's more expensive than the solution, than what you could put in place otherwise. But on aggregate, whether it's a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to have much bigger numbers on the back of that, as well as you're going to be causing human pain and suffering that whole duration. So I think there's some mechanical, tactical things you can do in terms of just chain of communication. And then there's that broader cultural and systemic change that organizations are utilizing too.
Yeah, great. Okay, Paul, let's maybe get some thoughts on it. How are you kind of raising awareness of this? I guess by the time you come into contact with individuals who are reporting MSDs, they already have them. So, what would be your advice in terms of tackling the problem earlier?
I think we need to address the problem where it lies. Upwards of 80% of our workforce / humans are showing up at a disadvantage with misaligned feet, and that affects the entire chain. And so that's going to affect their knees, their hips, their low back. And I believe, and John can maybe attest to this, but I believe the majority of the MSDs are lower extremity, low back, hips, and knees and ankles. And so if we start to address that by improving alignment in their feet, that whole entire kinetic chain moving all the way up the entire spine is going to be more stable. It's going to allow those muscles and ligaments and tendons to adapt and heal and respond appropriately, and not only prevent injuries from happening, but increase performance. I believe most companies want to minimize risk and improve production. And so addressing the problems where they start will help dictate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it feels that there's a few things emerging here. We'll maybe pick up on some of those ideas about what practically people can do. Paul talked there about addressing the issue at source, but getting the body alignment better. How are you tackling that, Ron, over at the U.S. Army?
We're taking more breaks, getting more stretching exercises out there, making them more aware of course, in the Army, we exercise all the time. Keep that core tight and in shape. Also looking at doing putting in ergonomic tools and stuff for their workstations, trying to get them to realize how to shift their job instead of sitting there and doing one rotation or one repetitive motion all day long. We're trying to get them to rotate through, and we also look at their work balance. So whenever we're assigning jobs to individuals, we're also looking at their complete exposure across the board and breaking it up so they have diversity on their daily work schedule. We let them create their own work schedule for the day, but we give them the schedule for the month that basically gives them that diversity in order to shift that load around so they reduce some of the ergonomic issues.
Yeah, so this idea of task rotation. John, let's maybe come to you.
Yeah, as I think, conversing with what Ron said, even just simple things like task rotation, whether it's on a daily basis to monthly task schedule or just cross training and putting in some dollars up front to make sure folks know how to do different activities at a work site. When you're talking about a closed facility that's generally doing the same sort of thing every day, that's easier than it is when you're on, say, a construction site or something that's field work, which is non-routine and you're doing something different every day. But I think broadening that skill set a little bit and allowing for some of that complexity of work allows you to have some ergonomic benefit there. The other thing I'll say is, it's getting more and more feasible technologically to integrate, sensors and wearables with your risk assessment process. I don't know that we're 100% at that saturation point yet, but just tightly risk assessing ergo issues, not just doing broad job assessments certainly for risk, but assessing the ergo risk in particular is something that organizations are doing more of. And I think that the availability and the feasibility of sensors in that domain is really making that a lot easier. If you're willing to make the spend on it, you can get great mapping, motion, strain, stress, time on task, things like that. So along with all the other jumps we're making in analytics and data and technology, that's going to be a great tool for us going forward.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of information out there. As Paul was mentioning earlier on, this idea of, I guess it all starting with this whole concept of the kinetic chain, and actually that the whole body has to work together in unison. This idea of interrelated body parts, muscles, joints, etc., and impact in one area can have an effect somewhere else. So to what extent are you seeing awareness of this concept of the kinetic chain? And actually, do you think it needs to be promoted further? John, I'll come to you because obviously you work across multiple different organizations on this.
Yeah, I think there's probably under awareness of that concept at the moment. I think that organizations come at the ergonomics perspective, typically with a resource that's probably a shared service. A lot of organizations hire out ergonomists or IH specialists to come in and do assessments. So there tends not to be some sort of dedicated point of view about how you're approaching ergonomic issues overall. You're probably doing sort of a kitchen sink or a shotgun style approach to a lot of that in a given facility or location. So I've heard organizations being conversant with that concept and understanding, body alignment and that sort of thing. But I think that there's probably under representation of that issue and probably less involvement from the kind of medical profession side in a lot of what we're doing, on a daily basis in a facility. So I'm curious to really learn more about it from folks like Paul and others and kind of understand how it fits into our daily practice.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, we'll maybe come to Paul in just a moment. But Ron, I want to get some thoughts from you on this issue because obviously, certainly in the U.S. Army, physicality is a big part of the role. It's a big part of the nature of the industry that you are in. So, to what extent is this concept of the kinetic chain being embraced at the U.S. Army?
Well, with the military, of course, it's easy since we're all conditioned and working out. We don't see that much of an issue at this time frame with ergonomic related injuries. Lower extremity from too much working out, too much running and stuff. We've seen that happen. So they're changing around the PT test and getting in new concepts for fitness. For the civilians, though, that's where you get into a problem because they don't have to do the exercising if they don't want to. They're older work group and stuff, usually real tired or just older workers in general. And so that gets to be an issue trying to get the preventive measures in place to get them conditioned enough to not have an injury based on a repetitive motion. So we do see a chronic issue with the older workers. I guess it's chronic across the board, but we're just trying to phase that out the best we can.
Yeah, and I guess that all comes back to education. Paul, let's maybe come back to you. Have a look at this idea of the kinetic chain and how all the, you mentioned earlier on the idea that it starts with the feet and actually, it's getting the foundations right. So how are you seeing organizations tackle this issue of MSDs by getting that kinetic chain right?
Well, I don't know if we are necessarily yet, but that's really the objective and the goal is to help them understand the importance and significance of it. To what John said, a lot of them have people come in and check ergonomic surroundings and function, but not really looking at the human body itself. They're just looking at the quote unquote workstation. And we need to address the body more than we actually do the workstation, because when the body's performing right, the workstation is going to naturally adapt and perform well. No different, I like to term these industrial athletes. And so we want to prepare those industrial athletes for their daily activity to the best we can. No different than future Hall of Famer Tom Brady. He does everything and anything possible to make sure he's prepared for his game to not only minimize risk or injury, but produce his outcome or get the greatest production out of himself for his team. And so I think we need to address our industrial athletes the exact same way, that we're giving them the best opportunity every single day. And to what Ron said, yes, it is. We start to see it in the older population or older workers, but that's because they've had years and years and years of malfunction. So the sooner we address the problem in the beginning, the less risk or prolonged injury or human suffering down the road will happen because we're giving them the best opportunity. And so the sooner we can address malfunction, malalignment, give them an improved kinetic chain for not only muscle balance but joint structure balance, the better outcomes they're going to have as employees and the minimized risk and longevity we're going to get out of them.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just to continue that sport analogy, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. There's this concept of marginal gains, which is just doing all the small things really well and doing them better than previous, doing them better than the competition, in order to accrue bigger gains by adding up all those component parts. Is this about doing lots of small things really well? John, you mentioned a couple of different techniques, and they can be cultural, they can be about task rotation, they can be about equipment, they can be about clothing, and they can be about wearables, taking data. Is it about putting all of these things together to actually tackle this high-hanging fruit challenge that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, Ben. And I think that's, all of safety is about incremental gain and doing a lot of small things the right way. That's a systemic view of safety, right? We don't want to have just one intervention that's going to prevent injury. We want to have 6 different interventions that are going to come at a prevention mechanism different ways and interlock and make sure that we keep people safe. I think that when you look at this against emerging science around things like neuroscience, human organizational performance, things like that, we understand people are error prone, right? That's the way we're wired, and so when it comes to ergonomics, the same thing's true. When you're 25 or 30 or 35, you're going out there doing your job. You're not thinking about ergonomics necessarily. You're thinking about you don't feel poorly. You can put your body through a lot of stress. You get to another point, and we have to realize people don't know where their red line is. They don't understand when they're starting to impact this, how early it starts, or what else happens. So the more interventions you put in place, generally, the more successful you're going to be in terms of just the pure systems perspective. The harder part is figuring out which one's the most effective. If you're on a short timeline or a cost benefit analysis sort of approach. That's that we were talking about earlier. Is it a 5-year sort of ROI? Is it a 1-year ROI? So that's where the rubber meets the road for most organizations, is figuring out, where they can most effectively spend on these sorts of interventions to get the most gain in the shortest amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. I can tell you that I've reached the time in my life where I am now starting to feel the exertions I put my body through in my formative years. So, guys, I've got loads more questions here for you, but I think we've got some questions from the audience, so I want to give enough time for those guys to put them to you. So I think we're going to go to our first audience question now, which I think is from Dennis over at Saint-Gobain. Hi there, Dennis. No, that's me on stage. Hi there, Dennis. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So it looks like there may have been some other questions around this too, but we have this new world that we're living in with COVID, which is requiring people to work from home a lot more than they would have. And even after we're through this, it's likely that people will be working up from home a lot more than they are. Just curious what companies are doing, sort of proactively to make sure that, employees aren't working in the ideal ergonomic setup that they might have in the office. They're working from a kitchen table or wherever it may be. Curious what other companies might be doing to kind of look at this and be a bit proactive about it.
Yeah, interesting question, Dennis. So who wants to take that one first? Have we got any takers? I'll maybe come to you, maybe point the gun at you, John, if I can, and then we'll maybe come to Ron and to Paul.
Sure, whoever would like to jump on that one can feel free. But I can tell you what I've been seeing organizations do and what we've been doing. A lot of organizations have been doing stipend style approaches, or allowing folks to come into the office in a controlled way or the workfront and go get ergonomic gear and material and do a setup. We've done video 360 ergonomic assessments internally, and done sort of living ergo assessments of the workstation. I think employees tend to create a sort of semi-ideal situation when you assess them remotely. I'll be paying more attention to my posture. Certainly, I'll be making sure I'm 90 degrees to the floor, all those sorts of things. I think, I'll flip the question a little bit and say beyond that, one thing I wish I heard more organizations doing is using the opportunity to actually pay attention to the essential workers and the folks who are in the field and their ergonomic issues at the same time. Because in a lot of cases, we've redesigned work in ways that might make the ergonomic and MSD challenges more acute. It's a team lift, and now we have physical distancing, so it can't be a team lift on this task. So what do we do? So we spent a lot of time thinking about the knowledge worker who gets to sit in their home office here, but not necessarily about the folks who are in the field doing the work. I think it's a really interesting question, and long term we're going to have to reckon with it. But it's both sides of that equation are going to still hold true.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Many thanks for the question, Dennis. And we've got a few more in the queue, so I'm going to maybe now go to Perry from 3M. Hi there, Perry.
Greetings. Really great dialogue. Thank you very much for the questions. I'm really curious on if you could talk from the perspective of how do we get some data for this longer term capital expenditure. So I heard the military's using like a 5-year, looking at a 5-year payback, or looking at more of a 5-year strategy. Can you give like a high level example of that?
Yeah, great question, Perry. Well, Ron, let's maybe come to you first with that one if we can.
Well, Well, I mean, we put in different workstations and different adjustable stand up, sit down chairs, and we're tracking. I guess we're using lagging indicators in order to look at long term goals to see if this is going to be an effective solution or not. Short term, we're not seeing injuries, we're not seeing people going on sick call, we're not seeing them missing work, and that type stuff. That doesn't really necessarily mean that it's working. That just means, like we talked about before, maybe it's just they're more fit and they can push it off to a longer period of time. So right now we're still, I guess if you want to think about it, we're still in the infant stage of, is our strategy working? It's working on the day-to-day business right now, but what's that going to look like in 5 or 10 years from now? I'm curious, back to our question about the homework and telework, what's that going to look like in 5 or 10 years? Because we're dumping all these people back on this home business setup or home operations. And I know that was a major issue with Hewlett Packard back in the late 90s, was how to get the employees set up at home to prevent ergonomic injuries or injuries in general in their home office environment. So it's going to be interesting to see what tools and solutions come out of this, because this is basically mass exercise with all these people getting dumped back into a home situation. And it's going to be dependent upon each different organization on how proactive they want to be based on whatever philosophy they're using, cost benefit analysis or employee turnover rate, or whatever they're using to determine how much money they can spend in that area.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I hope that answered your question, Perry.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer at a high level. I'm interested in where we're comparing the data, because ultimately that our leaders will be asking, like, where'd that data come from? So I'm interested maybe if John or others have inputs on what would be data that we can stand on as leaders, as professionals, to say, yeah, this is good data in making that decision.
John, let's come to you.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. It's a tough one, Perry. I mean, I think so. In 2013, so that's now almost 10 years old, we published a return on investment for safety and health document, making the business case for safety, to try to quantify, as many others have, what the total cost of an injury is when you take into account not just the medical, the lost productivity, the morale pieces. I think the average study is between about 3 and 10 times the number that we're quoting when you try to take into account those great things that are underneath the ocean surface or on the bottom of the iceberg. I haven't found a satisfying one source of data on that at this point. I will say, NSC is continuing to try to develop some tools and resources that we'll get for better accounting of that. It's also, when we think about these things in the concept of things like ESG and sustainability, folks are putting big dollar figures on, how they're approaching governance issues and things of that nature. I think that whole movement will help us to drive toward better data and get more holistic about how we capture these things. So I don't have a silver bullet answer for you, but I think there's a lot of effort driving in that direction right now.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Thanks for the question, Perry. I think we've got some sessions looking at business cases for some of these initiatives as we go further in. I think next up we've got Mary Lou from BGIS. Hi there.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for invigorating my morning. Lots of great things to think about. At my company, about 40% of all of our recordables are overexertions, and I speak to our leadership about every single one. And every once in a while, the issue will come up that some of them seem to be inevitable. They are, at least that's the thought. And they see an aging workforce as more of a liability than an asset. How do we get past that notion?
Yeah, fascinating question, Mary Lou. Paul, maybe I'll come to you first with this one if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mary, I would try and teach my people that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so the sooner we start to prevent things for that aging workforce, the more longevity and decreased risk they're going to be at. So again, it goes right back to being proactive. We all need to be proactive in every component of our life. But again, addressing where the outlying conditions are causing, or it's causing outlying conditions, and putting a thumbprint on that and making sure that we're being proactive to help them work as long as they can. And then when they're done work, enjoy life beyond that. I think that's, we're all short-term focused. and again, not thinking longevity. And so the sooner we can address the outlying problem with kinetic chain alignment and balance and proprioceptive input, the better outcomes we're going to get for our employees, and more importantly, the better production we'll get out of them. So addressing, again, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The sooner we prevent things from happening, the less we're going to have to work on curing them or fixing them in the backside.
Yeah, really interesting. Many thanks for the question, Mary Lou. Apologies, I'm trying to whip through as many of these as possible, but many thanks for the question. I think up next, we've got Brian from Jacobs Engineering. Hi there, Brian. Hello, Brian. We may have lost Brian temporarily. Ah, there he is. Hey, Brian, you can hear me okay?
Can do.
There we go.
Can you hear me all right?
Got you now, yeah.
Sorry about that. John had mentioned the use of data analytics for risk assessment purposes. Recently, we've successfully used sensor technology. We're talking about where we're getting that data. We were seeing 41% of our injuries due to strain year to date. So we started down the path of physical demands analysis, but we were seeing the issues with work design, but we didn't know where to start, what exactly to target. So the sensors pointed us to those key areas of the work process, and then we started to implement new controls. So not only were we able to target the key areas of those stressors, we were seeing employees doing the same job tasks, and the sensors identifying that they were bending and twisting 96 times per hour. And right away, there's your information, there's the focus areas. We would implement the new controls, and we would have the sensors worn through the full shift, and then before the controls were implemented, and then afterwards. And just by doing that, we were seeing 66% reductions in those lifts, bends, twists, and we were able to target those key areas. So rather than using lag indicators to identify we had a problem, which we already knew, by using sensor technology, armbands and back sensors, we were able to see those stressors. And so in a period of 2 months, we have new controls that we verified the effectiveness of, and we're going to see improvement over the course of, time. So I just wanted to pass that on, that John mentioned the use of sensor technology, and that is the future. And I've seen it in the last 3 months. Just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Many thanks for coming on and sharing, Brian. Really interesting. So there we go. I mean, I guess this is exactly what we talked about earlier. It's about using data. It's about maybe using emerging technologies that are coming through to identify where the issues are happening, perhaps in real time, and then mitigating those accordingly. John, just some thoughts from you on that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. But I would also add, there's the science there, and then there's also the art of making sure you have a point of view on this, you understand it holistically, and you have a culture that supports it. You'll probably never get to the advanced data if you don't have that in the first place, because you won't be going after it. But you do need both at the same time. So I would say it's great to hear that kind of micro case study. And I definitely think that is the future. I think we also need to pay attention to the cultural implications and make sure we're doing both, walking into endowment, right?
Yeah, great stuff. Paul, just some final thoughts from you on this issue. What's the key things to get right for you?
Again, unfortunately, most folks are showing up to work that are deconditioned. That's just where we're at. And so again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The sooner we can address outlying problems and correct them for the employee, minimize risk and increase production is going to happen. So again, it starts with, aligned balance with our feet, which affects our knees, our hips, and our low back, which will improve their ability to bend, twist, rotate, stand on, unfortunately, extra hard surfaces day in and day out for extended hours.
Yeah, there you go, folks. That is a chiropractor talking, so he absolutely knows what he's talking about. Folks, listen, John, Paul, and Ron, many thanks for sharing your thoughts here this morning. Much appreciated. You've got yourself on the right foot, if you'll pardon the pun, which is wonderful. Look forward to chatting with you all a bit more over the next couple of days.
Thanks, Ben.
Good morning.
Great stuff.
Have an awesome day.
Take care.